welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. We're here to talk about culture building in our mentor relationships. I know that it's an interesting extrapolation from our normal mentor relationships. I mean, I think obviously we've got our fellow mentor, someone that we're building this bond, this rapport with over this period of time. But I want to think about the deeper, greater implications of how this relationship can impact the people that we work with on a regular basis, and the culture and the tone it sets for everybody else that we work with. We've got a great guest speaker with us today. His name is Mike Johnson. Mike is a coach, a career strategist, and chief empowerment officer. He has been a part of our executive mentor program. He's worked in marketing at IBM for over 30 years. He's an incredible guy, and he's got a ton of wisdom. Mike, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Garrett. I appreciate the opportunity and the chance to compare notes and really wrestle with this.
That's awesome. So let's talk about culture. How can we, as mentors in our mentoring relationship, how can we begin to start thinking about how this relationship can start to help us build and grow our own cultures within the companies that we're working with?
And that's the central theme. Before I plunge into mentoring and the connection there, I'd like to talk about culture overall and why is so much effort and emphasis being placed on organizational culture, say now versus 5 or 10 years ago, because it's definitely an increasing awareness area and focus area. So kind of touch on what's culture anyway, what are the elements of culture, what are some challenging facing culture, and then really what's the role of leadership around that, and then specifically then zero in on what's the role of mentoring on this. So to start, thanks. Well, to start with, culture is, you think of it as a set of shared values, goals, practices, characteristics of an institution or organization. It's really the fabric of how the organization lives and breathes and does what it does, processes. And a lot of this is some of it's written in policies, some of it's articulating values and mission statements, but a lot of it is unspoken and unwritten. It's how you do things. And there are a lot of varieties and examples of this. I remember, and it's some of it's organization-wide, some of it's very unique to a particular setting. I remember I was in two very different positions in IBM. As I started out, I was in a development lab, and it was very structured, very 8 to 5 kind of thing, and certain kind of logistics around that. Then I moved to a field office, and we were focused on customers, and sometimes you were working in the evening to deal with stuff, whether it was a proposal need to be done or to help a client with a problem. And I remember very distinctly, my manager said, "Hey, if you end up working at night, it's still 8:30 in the morning. I expect to see you here." That wasn't a corporate-wide thing. It was his way of doing things. So culture takes different vibes, but it's that kind of fabric.
Well, can we talk about that story for a second and why that impacts culture? Because I think that it's interesting that you make the observation of this wasn't a corporate-wide thing. This was something that was more individualistic to that leader. I guess I don't actually know how to interpret that kind of story. That could be potentially like we show up every day, like with our heads, at 8:30, like that potentially could be positive, or that could be, hey, we're not actually focused about your well-being or just our own personal balance with work and life, and therefore, how do you want us to interpret that kind of story?
Well, it's two-edged, because it's one of those. It's a good point I was going to make a little late. I'll make it now. It's what is leadership conveying? What do they envision versus what's being received and what are the employees experiencing? So in that context, I mean, I could take it 3 ways. I tended to take it at face value as, okay, be careful how late I have to work at night because I got to be here at 8:30, versus the perspective of, okay, this is just kind of the way things are, versus do you really value me? If I work until like 2 a.m., what's to you if I show up till 10 o'clock because I was dealing with the situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And this makes me think of a question. I think this is it's certainly on my mind. I'd love to find what is that fine precipice, that fine line to walk in terms of, and this is sometimes what I've observed, at least with bigger companies that are more established versus smaller companies that are growing, where the bigger companies that are more established, they've got a lot of those cultural protocols, but it sometimes gets to the points that they get to become a little bit stale, where they sometimes lack empathy.
Right.
And
Right.
kind of like the scenario that you brought up, where it's maybe less empathetic to an individual circumstance and not necessarily caring about what someone can do from
Right.
a free reign perspective to make the company better. Because sometimes when you get in flow, you're just in flow and you want to keep working, especially if it's a creative task. But on the other flip side of being so unstructured from a growth perspective that people may not necessarily know where to turn or what processes and procedures are set in place so that people know that they fit. How can we walk that fine line, Mike?
Well, it's part, I want to say it's unique to the organization and what the flow is and what they value. And then part of it is, what level of flexibility and stuff do they make for this? And, some other areas this touches on are things like these notion of shared values. What do we hold in common? What do we stand for? And if there are those things that we stand for these things, and if equity and equitability is one of them, then do we enforce the same exact standard on everybody, every situation, or is it a little situation? Or like think of the old Pirates of the Caribbean movie. This is they took Jack Sparrow back on board. They were going to say, why didn't you just stick to the code and leave me? And well, we figured they were more like guidelines. It's like, when do you make those exceptions to the rule? But areas like leadership and employee engagement, how engaged are the leadership with their team? How engaged are the employees? So level of employee satisfaction, how is that interpreted? Are their metrics growing or decreasing? What's the level of innovation that's encouraged? What's the level of accountability that's sort of set as a tone and expected and required? What level of communication is there? Is it effective? Is it two-way? Transparency, integrity, inclusion, diversity, all these areas, those are all elements and shapes of culture. One specific example to your point is saying, when do you draw the line, or where's the fine line? Is the whole pandemic thing we're in now. Is a year ago, in fact, one of my clients was working at a small organization, and there was kind of a tiff about, well, I see the director is working from home every once in a while. Why can't I work from home? And it was a thing. It was like a tangible misalignment between directors and the employees. And guess what? 6 months later, everybody was working from home, and they still are. And it's just like that became not a factor. And now as they're looking at moving into a new building next year and sorting out what's that going to look like, this is just like how it's not whether they work from home, is how frequently, and what's a new structure going to feel like.
Let's talk about that for a second. I think there's a big point in this that I think it seems like we're almost circling around, and that is blind spots, both as professionals and as executives. Where are our blind spots when it comes to culture? I think it's so often so easy when you potentially hear from a professional and they say, oh, well, my company potentially doesn't value me as a professional, or the culture is not that great. But maybe they might be neglecting opportunities for them to actually engage in their culture that they may not realize are possible or may not necessarily lend credence to. On the flip side, as executives, as leaders, sometimes we're not consciously aware of the impact the procedures that we've set up have on our people. What are the greatest blind spots that you've identified so far from an executive perspective that they may have about their culture, as well as professionals and what they might have about their culture that they may not necessarily be realizing are available or opportunities for them?
Well, I think those in blind spots or gaps. What is management saying? What is senior leadership saying? That's usually trickle down, and then what do they envision? What are they saying? What are they articulating versus what's being experienced? And where are the gaps? Where are the blind spots? As you pointed out, it's very appropriate, and it might be things as of a style, right? If it's a management philosophy and style is more directive and more, this is where we're going, everybody get on board, the old student body face left kind of thing. And they're trying to encourage an atmosphere of innovation and creativity. And those things tend to run counter to each other. There's, so a more collaborative, hands-on, let's work partnership, compact kind of thing with the employees versus a directive, almost dictatorial. In some cases, it's dictatorial. Other cases, it may not be, it's not intended as dictatorial, but how's it being received? So
And
that,
how,
go ahead.
yeah, no, I was going to say, how about the flip side from like a professional's perspective? Because I think a lot of times as a professional in a company, I might think to myself, well, I don't have any control over the culture. I'm just a person within the grand scheme of things. And if it's not going the way I want it, I've got no control. Like my hands are off and all I can do is complain about it. What are the blind spots for a professional that they could potentially not realize they have in control of to potentially make their culture better for themselves?
Well, one of them is I would call the victim mentality. As employees are taking it, well, this is just, it's a toxic, how many times have we heard the phrase toxic culture? It was a toxic culture. I couldn't stand it. I had to leave. And it was, we tend to get in the victim mentality. And it's like the management, the team, the world's ganging up on me and I'm not effective and not productive. I'm not able to do my job. And as I coach a lot of individuals in career management, career transition, or what they want out of a career, there's a growing sense of I need a level of flexibility. I like to work by myself and in teams, but I also need some level of independence and autonomy and trust. And the notion of trust and integrity both ways is key. So, I mean, three key things there are transparency. Am I being transparent with my leadership, my immediate manager? Because that's usually, what are the odds? The biggest percentage of people that leave because of an issue with an immediate manager. So what's that relationship like? And can I, as an employee, work toward a more effective connection there? And as IBM, we used to have a segment of management training that said how to manage your manager. So how do you really build an effective working relationship there? And what do they need? What does he or she need? How do I meet that need? And are there some areas of, okay, is it the style that you need? Is it the forum or format you need? What are some things that I might work on there that we can collaborate with and come up with that? One example is just how frequently you touch base. So often, and obviously, it's a management tenet or principle that you don't counsel an employee negatively. You don't wait for that until their performance review annually. And then you're saying, here's all the things I observed that I really wish you could have done better, or you just ding them on, right? Well, if that's the first time employees hear about it, it's a really ineffective way to manage, which contributes toward the toxicity of the culture versus, hey, you see something, you observe a behavior, then it's like, let's sit down and talk about it. I had a manager once who, one of my best managers at IBM, we were remote. So we had met each other like twice in person and he was in Dallas and I was in Indiana. So we'd talk every 4 to 6 weeks and we'd schedule it out. And usually I would have a list of things that I want to run by him. And this was, we had email and stuff, but there's sometimes you just want to talk things out. And so I have a growing list and he said, Randy, I got like 12 things. He said, Mike, I got time for 3. What are your top 3? Let's talk about those. And I had to learn to have an effective dialogue with him, is bring the most critical things to him that I needed to talk through. And the other stuff, I had to figure out another way to deal with it, find another resource or kick a one topic email. Hey, Randy, I need your perspective on this. I'd like to go this way, but I need your approval or I'm stuck.
That's a great story. I think that's a great answer to the whole question about how can we potentially identify our own blind spots within our company. Because if we think to ourselves, kind of back what you're saying about the victim mentality of, well, if I'm a professional at my company, the culture should be, kind of laid out for me and all I have to do is kind of walk through it. That's not necessarily how culture works. You're a part of it just as much as anybody else is at that company. But the story that you really did a great job of highlighting was that you were in control of how you managed up with your manager that you met with maybe once every 4 to 6 weeks. And when you might think as a professional, like, well, there are 10 things that I need to have seen. In reality, you were able to realize, I don't need to have 10 things discussed in this meeting. If I could really parse it down to 3, these would be the top 3 things. And it made my manager more effective at managing me. And it forced you to be more creative to find your needs elsewhere within the company to have them solved. Now, I would imagine at first it might have been a little uncomfortable, but the benefit of actually being able to find that was probably really empowering. And I think any professional that might think to themselves like, well, my culture's not great, or I'm not in a position where I feel like I'm thriving or succeeding, they could potentially turn to themselves to say, okay, what are the things that they're not getting from their manager or the people that they're working with? And how can they find it from other people within the company to fill those needs? Because, that victim mentality isn't serving them. It's just creating potentially more toxicity in the company. That's what contributes to the underpinning of the culture. And sure, as leaders, we need to be more conscious of this. But as professionals, we should be conscious of this too and try to potentially do what we can to make the culture serve us, not us serve the culture.
Very good way to put it. Us, yeah, exactly. And it's really, how do we serve each other? Because the culture serves me, but I also serve the culture. And it's that notion of alignment I talk about a lot. Is that, what's the level of alignment between what senior leadership is saying and what I'm receiving? And then the other way that works out from a management relationship as well, it's behooves me as an individual professional to say and understand, what does my company need? What does my business unit need? What does my leadership in the business unit need? What does my immediate manager need? And be able to think through that and say, how am I contributing? Because, I make him or her successful as my immediate manager, that trickles upward too. They're successful and they're going to make sure I'm successful. But it's a two-way street. And so their responsibility, and as a leader, our responsibility is to instill in our people that level of empowerment and autonomy in them. So they're contributing, give them the freedom and the tools and the resources and the focus that they need to help focus and grow those skills. And that's it's a two-way street. That notion of alignment, what am I doing to contribute? And it's on me to find out. And, as example, the next manager I had way back on the 830 story did not have that perspective at all. He was much more loose in terms of, when you show up, it's, here's what we need from you when you're here. One manager put it this way. I said, what do you feel about flex time and time off? And she said it this way. She said, I get what I need from you. You take what you need from me. So it's each person, each leader making that live unique to them, but in the context of the larger culture.
Tori, what are your thoughts on this? I think you might have had a question there. What do you think? And what is the question you've got for Mike?
Well, I did, but then it was more of and I was like, it's not really a question, it's a comment, in that it's so draconian in some ways, where we're in corporate and how we're dealing with people and companies now, is that just like in relationships, you can't expect, it's so much responsibility for one person to have to fulfill all your needs. And when you're given this status and you've earned it to be a leader, that we're still in this feeling that it has to be linear. It's like, I have to answer all their questions. Like, it has to be me. Right. And then there's two things that happen. One is what we just know, right? Is one person, and we're learning from one person. It's very linear. And then to let the ego go from the person that's in that leadership role, to be okay that it doesn't reflect on them. And in fact, it shows better leadership, in my opinion, when you're able to allow this cross-pollination within your company, that, you can get the answer. We're all trying to, move the bottom line. And however we do that as a company is however we do it as a company. And it takes a great leader to recognize that. That was more just my comment.
No, a good
observation. Change that? How do we change that going forward with people? It doesn't have to be linear.
That's a great observation, Tori. It really is. And it just hones the perspective. What's the responsibility of the individual leader? And, in my opinion, observing in a company as big as IBM, but in a lot of others, the first line manager job is the hardest job in the company. Because all of the processes, policies, expectations, running the business rest on the first line manager. And who does the employee? All the employees look to that first line. They're their line of defense, right? And so many don't have the infrastructure or processes. And so that individual's role shifts a little bit with the nature of their employees. For a brand new employee, they're going to spend more on time, one-on-one time, onboarding, coaching, counseling, mentoring, versus the experienced person. They don't need that much time, because but it's also instilling in the individual the understanding of what resources exist to help them, and where do you find them, how do you engage those resources. And that's a good turning point to say, okay, so let's look at what's the role of leadership in this culture. And we talked a lot about it, is to live out the culture for the employees, give space to the employees, and make an effective two-way street. And those are hallmarks of a healthy culture, of effective communication and focus on the employees' development skills, collaborative leadership and teamwork, all these kinds of elements, and then this to reinforce the notion of alignment and accountability, and build that and instill that. And part of live it out. I remember one of my clients said, look, I approach this me first. I said, what do you mean? He said, I start with me. And I have to I have to fulfill my own obligations to my team
Mm.
so that I can expect them to fill their obligations to me in the business. So it's a good way to put it.
Which is really interesting, because how does a leader fulfill their obligation to themselves? Because as you get closer to the top, it's so lonely. And then how do you find someone that, because I'm thinking about emotional and physical health, there's so much responsibility that, obviously, what we do, which is offering that relief of that sounding board to someone who's an executive, because really the difficulty is for them to have someone that they can offload on, if for lack of a better word.
No, good observation. And that it really is that I see three distinct roles here. One is that of the manager, of managing work and managing people to get to the work, and project managers, kind of team leaders, is a bit of that kind of all combined there. Second is mentoring, which isn't hands-on managing. It's okay, I'm trying to instill in you a skill, or I'm trying to be a out of the daily grind perspective on this, and have some observations. Okay, where you're at in the business, here's some things you likely could focus on or should focus on, or here would be the next steps, and let's talk about things that a typical manager doesn't do in the day-to-day. And companies have things like skip-level interviews, third level management interviews every once in a while, all sorts of variety of things, or assign a regular mentor, or their series of mentors. So is that role of mentoring, which is, and the other aspect is skill development. So, manager's role is to help focus on the employee, not just on today's tasks, but then on the future. Where do you want to go? What does the business continue to need? Where are some skills that we can help you develop? What do you want to do? And how do we help instill that, meeting today's needs, and help you grow into a next assignment or future? So all that's management. Then mentoring, there'll be out of the day-to-day grind experience on that, and sounding board perspective, and maybe it's work with somebody on a specific skill, and it's the typical mentor things of, you watch me do it, okay, now we're going to do it together, now I'll watch you do it, and then comment. And then the other third element is coaching, is even further removed from the, we're going to help you develop a skill. It's really about the employee's agenda. What are you wrestling with? I'm just, here's a sounding board to ask questions and help get inside your mind and what makes more sense. And sometimes that's in context of alongside a skill that they're building or process. There's a lot of some work and research that shows that someone who is an engaged coach, but not a specific mentor to the process, who's asking the deeper questions and forcing the client or the employee to think through those questions, tends to be more productive in implementing the process that they're learning, because they're being asked and nudged and challenged a little bit to get deeper with it.
Yeah, I find that in a lot of the people that I interview, there's this, you start as a mentee. It's funny how you associate, you're young and you're starting out and you're mentored. And then as you climb the ranks, you're a mentor. And then now introducing this like kind of horizontal mentorship, it's very hard for someone to let go of, it's kind of like, I've reached the top. Like there is nothing above mentor for me, right? That is the rite of passage. That is like, I have been through the school of learning, and now I no longer, it's this really strange, like, it's like a dog on a bone. Like they can't let go of the fact that, it's not, yes, you've earned your ranks and you're now a mentor, but that doesn't mean you still aren't worthy of being, you so much that your mentoring is now completely out of your realm of activity now. Does that make sense?
It does, and it also highlights the power of mentoring, and there are different forms and styles of mentoring. One of my most trusted colleagues at IBM I worked with for years, which kept saying, well, I talked to my mentor last week, and you have a mentor, one person, and she had, through like 20 years of IBM, she consistently, it was an early manager of hers, that their careers went different paths, but they were still with IBM, and she would check in with them about every 6 months or so. I didn't have that experience. I had mentors usually in specific settings and for specific durations or skills or things I was building. So they're both are valid. And but I know what you're talking about. There was a time I remember distinctly walking in the office one day and his, oh wait, I'm not the newbie anymore. I'm a veteran. When did this happen? Right? And so, and there were a variety of different styles of mentoring that we said sort of informal / formal programming. You say, okay, pick a protege. some of it's like pairing up the experienced person with the newer person and help them flesh this out. Or it might be more, specific to a specific skill or whatever, work on a project together.
Mike, a question I have on that topic of just being in our mentor relationship and just intentionally focusing on building and growing our culture is, what is a tactic, what is something that we can do right now as leaders in our mentor relationship? What can we do to challenge our mentor, to encourage our mentor to maybe take a deeper, more intentional, different angle focus on our culture to improve it? And how can they do the same for us?
It's a good question. It was interesting. I saw the power of questions is we can't overemphasize that. Being connected, and that's I think a discipline of both coaching and mentoring, to being in the moment with the other person, whether it's your protege, mentor, or peer mentor, or whatever. It's being able to say, well, let me focus on, what are you bringing today? What do we deal with today? What are you wrestling with? Let's talk about it. So it's that notion of being a sounding board, how the daily perspective, you have nothing to prove to me. You have to compare resumes or, cross arms or arm wrestle each other. Not that we can do that with COVID anyway. But so part of that is just being intentional, I think. The other part is thinking, okay, what is, and this, it's interesting, I'll make a quick segue, is how do you interpret the culture from outside a company? It's almost impossible. You can ask, you go to the website, you can see what they say about it, but it's that, is there a gap between what the leadership envisions and what the employees experience? And you don't really know that until you're a part of it. And so part of that is saying what needs challenged. Are there some areas that this is just sort of the way we've done things, and so we've gotten complacent with it, and we need some challenges? Others is it might be more intentional than that. And it could be programmatic to say that, let's think through some disciplines of how you can evolve as a leader and evolve toward leadership. And sort of the term that some big company use, IBM uses, floor leader. The people didn't have a designation of leader, but they just were a natural leader. People gravitated to them, and so they had a perspective. They had the ear of people, and we've all known people like that. Sometimes in my better days, I was like a person like that, but more often I observed and was working with people like that. And so we have those kinds of perspectives, and sometimes you want to seek those people out as mentors.
Yeah.
You have to have just one mentor.
That's interesting that you say it like that about the culture and the growth and finding different mentors that help us challenge us on where we might have our own blind spots or things that we may not realize. It makes me think of a story of just one of the companies we're working, actually a few of the companies we're working with, where they're dealing with this, where they've got their 360-degree assessment, and one of the scores they're looking at is their innovation score. And one thing that we're consistently finding is that they think much greater of themselves in terms of innovation than what their colleagues do. And one of the things we hear constantly in feedback is like, well, I do a lot of things that are innovative, but a lot of people have no idea what I do. And it's like, that is a huge opportunity. There's an opportunity to educate our coworkers or colleagues about what we are doing that's innovative, because if they don't know what we're doing that's innovative, they're not educated about that, they're not just going to assume it. And unfortunately, sometimes we build up our own passive aggressive walls about why we think to ourselves, well, the sales team is just wasteful, or who knows what the software developers are doing all day, or marketing, what the heck is going on there? I feel like they're just spending money on ads like crazy. It's easy for us to formulate our own assumptions, what we think other people are doing while we're working hard at being innovative. And so I guess the point is that potentially some of the biggest opportunities for growth and culture can be just in communication between people that really don't know what we do, because if we don't, people are going to assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that notion I was trying to communicate was that outside the daily experience thing. Maybe somebody who's not in the role, maybe they've been in the role in the past, but they're not now. And so they're out of the day-to-day stuff, and they're able to focus on those kinds of things and poke and prod at some of those areas, and maybe be somewhat challenging, because that's the whole point, is we need to be challenged, and and how that works. But the other thing is so what does this look like in terms of then, how do you shape this out, is just learning disciplines and practicing them, learning what mentoring looks like and developing some sort of mentoring approach within the company. And some companies have gone so far as say, I'm going to instill more of a coaching discipline and have formal coach training for the managers. So but whatever the approach is, to encourage mentors to grow as mentors, to be more intentional about assigning mentors. And this is especially true in the area of increasing focus on inclusivity and diversity, is especially women and minorities are underrepresented in so much of our culture and corporate culture. And a very distinct step is to really sponsor more mentorship, more allyship, have allies that are, for example, an aspiring businesswoman who wants to be a leader has a white male leader to help coach her, counsel her, mentor her, be a sounding board for her. And obviously, as that changes over time, then you see greater percentage of leadership being, representing of the diversity. But there's another area of alignment. We might, the county might say, well, we welcome all, but if the, board of directors and the first line leadership looks all like white males, and say, wait, where's the disconnect there?
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. That's a great point. Well, hey, Mike, this has been an awesome lunch and learn. I feel like I've learned a lot about culture. I think you brought up some really great points to think about how we can be more intentional about growing our culture, both from the leadership perspective as well from a professional perspective. My last question is, how can our audience find you? How can our audience connect with you? How can they learn more about your work?
Well, thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. My solo business, I have two hats here. One is Coach for Tomorrow, coachtomorrow.com. I do, again, leadership coaching, career management coaching, a lot of these areas one-on-one and with groups of leaders. Increasingly, I'm focusing on a new business called Culture Fit 2020. It's culturefit2020.com. And we're focused on organizational culture and helping organizations, companies, not-for-profits, flesh this stuff out. So what are we seeing that is our culture? What are our employees experiencing? Are there some gaps? Are there misalignments? And then what do we do about that? So we're focused on both helping them assess what's going on and then see where some areas for improvement might be, and then plan an attack plan. How are we going to go implement some specific tactics and leadership training and professional development that help address some of that?
Awesome. Mike, thanks for being here. This was a great lunch and learn. Tori, thanks for being my co-host. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for being here. See you, everybody.